So when I was at the Pentagon, I instituted a policy that if there was a subnet that scanned our infrastructure, there was a 30-day block that would be put in place, right? 30-day block on the Class C. What I did unknowingly was impact embassies around the globe. This one application that was hosted inside the Pentagon, that was reached by embassies around the globe. So when I would put a Class C block in place, what would happen is an embassy that might be sitting in that block now can't access the Pentagon. And so there was a one-star general in the Pentagon who was responsible for this global application that was being used by all the embassies. And he got pissed. And so he found out that I had this in place, and he literally called me to a meeting in his office and said, like, you will stop this, and you will stop it now. He sends an email to my boss, and my boss then sets up a meeting, and we get into the room. My boss literally, I love it. Verbatim, he says, "So which one are you choosing?" Excuse me? Which one are you choosing? Because you are not greater than the good of the entire building.
For someone just starting their cybersecurity career today, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice based on everything you've learned over 3 decades?
Somebody's starting their cyber role today. So the number one thing I tell everybody, when it comes to cyber, you will burn out fast if you don't do one thing, and that is find your passion. You got to find what you're passionate about. And cyber is this wide, right? From deeply technical to not technical at all, right? And so you've got to find where in that line, right, where you're at and what it is that you literally can do, right, for 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. And your curiosity is going to continue to carry you, right? Because if you don't, whatever you end up going into, you are literally going to get burnt out, because you will find a time where you're going to have to do 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. And it's going to feel like hell. And so find that one area that just intrigues you so much that you find and light a fire, right, of passion, because you want to dive into that and swim and swim and swim and swim.
Today, we're joined by someone who's made it his life's mission to add value to everyone around him. Larry Whiteside Jr. brings 3 decades of cybersecurity expertise across multiple C-suite roles and is also a keynote speaker and mentor. Now, Larry is the co-founder of Confide, a cybersecurity consulting firm. Larry, great to have you on the Be Fearless podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Well, let's talk about your leadership journey and a little bit about your philosophy. You've held virtually every C-suite role in cybersecurity: CTO, CISO, CSO, and more. How did you get started in cybersecurity, and how did your roles evolve throughout the years?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I sort of fell into it. I had no plans on, like, I didn't have this, I want to be in what we used to call information security, right? Mm-hmm. I had no idea what it was. But what happened was I got an internship writing code, right? And it was 500 million lines of COBOL code that was the project. And I hated it, because what a lot of people didn't realize was, and this still happens today, that class coding, so whether it's cyber, whether it's coding, but a lot of the technical things that you do from a classwork standpoint are vastly different in the real world, right? And so what I used to do in class, I was like, I love coding. Wow, it's so amazing, and right, do these projects. And so when I got the internship and I realized I did a lot of code writing and never saw the output of what I was creating, I hated it, because I realized the excitement part was seeing the actual outcome of what I built. And you never really got to that point. You were just constantly compiling and compiling. So I was going to quit the internship. And they basically said, hey, we don't want you to quit. Like, how about you break the code? So then I was like, wait. So try and break this thing that somebody wrote and try and compile it and make it do things it shouldn't do. Oh, that was fun. And that put my mind in a different mindset, right? And so then upon graduation, I went into the military and got my commission. And that's when the whole world opened up, because in the early 90s, right, that's when the military had created this concept of defense in depth, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to understand technology and the different layers of security that you can put in technology. And I got introduced to firewalls and router ACLs, and all of that stuff became really, really interesting to me. And as a captain, well, as a lieutenant, I'll say an officer back that time, right, when I got my commission, I got put in charge of what was called this new concept, the Base Network Control Center. So I had all of IT, which back then security was a little component of it, right? But it was in its fledgling state. And so I got to play with firewalls and implement these things. And I was leading the team because I was a technical leader. And so it just fueled a passion for me that just kept going, right, as I, made rank and got different roles. And so it was a very interesting journey, because I was at the beginning journey of what the military was trying to do from an information security standpoint, which then became information warfare, right? And then right as I got out, because funny story, I started my career at Pope Air Force Base. So it's 7,600 people, right? And so, that's a mid-sized company, so to speak. And I was responsible for all technology. First, it was the Base Network Control Center, but then I got promoted to first lieutenant, and I was responsible for the entire base, all technology on the base. Well, we had firewalls, and then we put in ACLs, but then we put in this thing called a content filtering system. Well, that was very interesting, right? To do web filtering in the early days of the internet. And that opened my eyes up to a whole lot of different things, because having to track what people are doing on this new thing called the internet became a very weird, but also fun thing. And I built a Tiger team to go do some, what I'll call some chase downs of people, right? When we would see certain things being sites being gone to, we're like, all right, hey, it's time to go. It's coming from this IP address. This IP address is in that building. Go. And we had a Tiger team that would go do stuff. So it was fun. But what happened was I fell in love with the security side of the whole technology landscape. So I applied to a role at the Pentagon that was a security analyst role. And so when I applied to that role, back then as an officer, you went to a job board. You saw these different roles, you applied to it, you submitted your evaluations, and they would then call you. You do an interview over the phone, and then you get a couple of interviews, and they select somebody. So I got selected for what I believed was a security analyst role, and I show up on my first day with Major Paul Budefeld, and Paul, I show up, and we had an office outside the Pentagon, and so I show up at the office at 8 a.m. He's like, all right, put your stuff down, we got to go. I'm like, where do I put it? And he's in this office with this mahogany and all this stuff. I'm like, where the cubicle's outside. I put it down. He goes, no, just put your stuff down here. And I had been promoted to captain by that point. So we hop on the bus that takes us. And for those who don't know, the Pentagon area, right, they have shuttle buses that take you from the Pentagon to all these other offices in Arlington and the likes of Roslyn and so forth around the Pentagon, City and so forth. So we hop on the bus, go to the Pentagon, and we walk into this room, and there's an SES-4, which I didn't know what that meant at the time. Mm-hmm. So at the base level, right, a GS-15 is a high-ranking individual civilian. So there's an SES-4 sitting at the front of the table, and there's a lot of brass and stars and clovers on shoulders around the table, and then my name tag is at the end of the table, and I'm like, this is day one. And I go sit down, and Paul sits behind me in the staff area where there's like 6 rows on each side of this big conference table. And he goes, people are going through the slides, and and then a slide comes up, Chief of Information Warfare, Captain Larry Whiteside. Wait, what now? And he stands up back, and he introduces me, and he talks through the slides. And I'm just sitting there looking at the slides and looking at And then he stops, and then, everybody starts welcoming me, and, I give a little bit about myself. And then after the thing, I'm like, what just happened? And then he tells me about the role I got, the chief of information warfare. I'm like, what? I thought I was coming here to be a security analyst. It was not quite that.
Yeah, not quite a captain kind of job, I don't think.
No, it was not. It was not at all.
No, I mean, definitely the security analyst role didn't feel like it would be a captain level job.
No, but it's interesting because what happened. So if you think back to the mid 90s, the skill sets for these things weren't very popular. There were people who knew tech, people who knew, routing and switching, but to know security, right? To know security was a nuanced skill at that time, right? It wasn't like it is today where you can find, well, you've got all these certifications and all these. No,
right.
Back then, if you had a CCIE or an MCSE, those were the two king certifications, right? Mm-hmm. CCIC meant you were basically a PhD in routing and switching, and an MCSE meant you were basically a PhD in the Microsoft ecosystem. That was it. So to know this security stuff well and understand firewalls deeply, understand ACL rules, right, as it related specifically to security, understanding, right, you had ISS that had started way back then out of Atlanta, Chris, who was the founder of that. Like, so you had these very small pockets of people who knew it. So in the military, because it wasn't a traditional career field, they didn't have people who knew that very deeply. And so I was what was called a 33S, which was by terms of the military and the Air Force, it's a communications officer.
Right.
Well, that doesn't, like a comm officer is typically not a technologist, right? And so it's not, they had these three different, A, B, or C shred, right? So an A meant you were a coder or developer, B meant something else, and so each of these shreds, there was no security shred. And so what happened was, in my particular instance, was this role, as they posted it, they were trying to find people that understood just security technologies as a whole as an officer. And I was one of the few people who had just, because I was a geek at heart, had delved so deeply into the security realm versus the networking and infrastructure. And, ATM was a big thing back then and all. That wasn't the area I liked. It was the security stuff, because I had gotten in this mindset of breaking things through my internship. Now understanding how to stop, how are people breaking things from somewhere else? They're going to break here. And so you had the Air Force CERT, and I started doing work with them with the Air Force CERT when I was at the base level. So all of these things just began to really pique my curiosity and have me go in deep, deep levels of learning and playing and breaking myself.
Yeah. And you just kind of raised your hand and said, hey, I want to do security stuff. You're a captain. And they're like, we got you. Come over here and we'll let you know what you're going to be doing. We're going to be spending a lot of time in overtime. And
yes.
Yeah.
Very, very long hours.
Yeah.
Very, very long hours.
Yeah. And, so when I got involved with security, it was related to the U.S. military as well. So I was working with the Navy as a contractor. And I was just building IT systems for them. And when I delivered one of the systems, they were saying, well, we can't accept it because it's not secure. And I was like, what? What do you mean it's not secure? And they're like, well, you have all these vulnerabilities and you have these findings and you didn't do this STIG thing and that thing and whatever. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And then they kind of handed me a book, the DISA STIG. So start going through here.
That was our Bible. DISA STIGs were the Bible.
Absolutely.
Right?
And at that time, I remember, you're talking about information assurance being, what they used to call it in the military. I don't think they call it in the military. Yeah,
it was. So the military called it information assurance. That is correct.
Yeah,
right.
And then what was interesting is that it always seemed like everyone that was in information assurance at the time, and this is like early 2000s, they I don't know how to put this nicely and politically.
It was governance. They were governance like that.
They were governance, but it was like everyone that couldn't succeed in technology, like being that CCIE wannabe or the MCSE wannabe or that, Linux guru wannabe, because I don't think we even have a MCSE thing for Linux
Nope.
even today. If they couldn't make it on the technology track, they somehow got funneled into information assurance, and then they were just like the Department of No. And of course, you're talking to them about, you need to do this, you need to do this on the network, and all they could tell you is no, because they didn't understand the technology.
That's it.
And it was a very frustrating group to work with back in the early 2000s, right? And but they often let the IT folks, right? The IT folks were the ones that were executing on the requirements. So if you have, CCNP or not CCNP,
CCNA.
No. So this is like unclassified network protect.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
So we had these things that we had to do on classified networks. We had these things we had to do on unclassified networks, and we had to execute the firewall rules or whatever. It was always IT that did. It wasn't really information assurance. They would go and say, "Did you do it?" And we'd say, "Yes," and they'd say, "Okay." And then, but it was definitely a different mindset back in the early 2000s as it kind of moved forward. Just like in the Navy, the folks that ran the bases and ran the security parts of it, making sure everything was going according to the security standards, was the NavCom Telstay, right? So it was the communications office. Yep. And everyone that I worked with was an IT communications officer, right? They weren't cyber people, but they had to get up to speed. And I remember back in like 2008 in Japan, we had this cybersecurity readiness inspection, CCRI kind of thing that happened. And it was a complete mess. And it was the third inspection in a row that failed. And that 05 and 04 that were running this place pretty much got canned, right? They were no longer available for you to talk to. And then they replaced it with an 06 and an 05, right? So yeah, the CO was an 06, and then all of a sudden things started becoming much more serious about cybersecurity back in like 2008, 2009.
Okay.
And then from there, you have the cyber command.
Yeah, well, Cyber Command came around in 2003, right?
Yeah.
Because here's what happened. So I don't know whether you call it fortunate or unfortunate. When I was on active duty, I was pre all of the real heavy governance. We had the Orange Book, right? We had the Statistics, but we had the Orange Book. But we sort of did what we needed to do, right? And what we felt was we didn't have a heavy information assurance hand on us at the time, right? And so I separated in 2002. After 2002, right? So I was part of 9/11, and that's a whole nother story. But after 2002, one Cyberman got created. So Tom Ridge, his office, when I separated, I went to the Nuclear Naval Agency in DC. And I worked there as their head of cyber.
Yeah, and NPI kind of stuff, right?
Right. And it was weird because they were a naval agency, but they had more contractors than they had employees.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so a lot of my concern was all around access. But because my role, I reported into the CIO, right, the head of technology, but I was the CISO, and they didn't have the title CISO, right? I was the director of security, but I owned all things that were cyber and security related. I bought my first SIM while I was there. I did a whole bunch of things, but it was interesting because that from 2002 to right after, when DHS started, Tom Ridge's limo sat right outside my window. And that's when cyber, all of these different things started popping up, and they started getting real heavy on like real security and governance and information assurance. And they started going through a whole lot of changes in how it was done in the military. And again, because I moved into private sector, many of my friends who were comm officers who then popped into those types of roles, they told me about the heavy-handedness of what would happen if they weren't doing things, and how much control was being pushed down on them, and how much Air Force CERT was driving things. And I'm like, wow, like it sounds horrible. And I unfortunately, or fortunately, I had way more freedom when I was doing it.
I think you would have appreciated it. I remember having conversations with 06s and other commands, with our 06 and our 05s and stuff. And, it was none of them wanted to take security seriously. Right. And and I remember one, 06, she actually turned off a building that had this other command, and she got top cover because they weren't doing things right. And before then, it was always so frustrating that we were trying to secure them, or we're doing all this stuff. We're trying to pass cybersecurity rating inspections and such. And then we would not get the support we needed from the other commands because we were a support function. We're IT. Yeah. But we were also an operational command, right? Because, we weren't doing anything without computers anymore at this time. Right. Yeah. And they were putting our network at risk, and we were just supposed to sit back and take it. And after all these things kind of failed, and it was a little, the inspector general came in to help, and then, moved some people around, made some recommendations, and then we started getting the support that we needed to have from a security perspective. And I think that, so I was very appreciative of it. I like the, you're a CISO, I'm a CISO. I like the governance and the structure, and that the ability that we can make decisions and then have the execution happen, as opposed to being like information assurance was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it was kind of like this group of people that no one listened to, and commanders just did what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I think it's
there's a balance. Listen, there's a balance. I'll tell you, I'll share one story. And to this day, it's still the best story I've ever had, because this didn't happen a lot in private sector, right? Because private sector is driven by money versus, right, Department of Defense. So I had this one. So when I was at the Pentagon, I had instituted a policy that if there was a subnet that scanned our infrastructure, there was a 30-day block that would be put in place, right? 30-day block on the Class C, right? Because you can't do one IP, because, right, that's going to change within a day or a week or whatever, right? So I would put a 30-day block on the Class C. What I did unknowingly was impact embassies around the globe. This one application that was hosted inside the Pentagon, that was reached by embassies around the globe. So when I would put a Class C block in place, what would happen is an embassy that might be sitting in that block now can't access the Pentagon. And so there was a one-star general in the Pentagon who was responsible for this global application that was being used by all the embassies. And he got pissed. And so he found out that I had this in place, and he literally called me to a meeting in his office and said, like, you will stop this, and you will stop it now. It is impacting, the program that I run, and this is critical access and so forth. I'm like, sir, I'm so sorry. I did not realize. And so I gave him some solutions. I said, well, what you can do is, if I knew there were black boxes that, could be deployed to do end-to-end encryption that would then bypass, right, would get by that, and I could just open the port for those encryptions from those static, right? I said, or they can buy a static IP at the ISP in their region. And he was like, that's not acceptable. I'm like, well, he's like, who do you report to?
Sound very reasonable here.
Who do you report to? So, I told him, and, he sends an email to my boss, and my boss then sets up a meeting, and, we get into the room, and he tries to dictate to my boss. And my boss says, okay. He tells my boss all the problems and that I've caused and everything. He's like, okay. Now, of course, I've pre-briefed my boss, And he goes, so what did Captain Whiteside tell you? And he said, well, he said I can only do this or this. My boss literally, I love it. Verbatim, he says, so which one are you choosing? And, like, excuse me? Which one are you choosing? Because you are not greater than the good of the entire building.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the things I try to get our commander to understand was that exactly that same thing. It's like when, you have folks, regardless of rank, regardless of importance, they may be very important, but when they show up and they put your network at risk, they don't just put themselves at risk. They're putting everyone on the network at risk, and they're putting the gig at risk. Right. And
100%.
I think that, again, it's, you see a general, salute. You want to make them happy, but at the same time, they're not greater than the whole. Right. And I think that they know that. I think that they know that if you go up enough levels, that it's not going to go the way that they think it's going to go, because, it is the right thing to do. Right.
It is. But you also understand in the military specifically, and this happens in corporate America too, right? Mm-hmm. Is people think titles will scare the individual in front of them enough to let them do, because they're not thinking in the moment when it's happening, they're not thinking about the bigger impact to everyone else. They're thinking about the impact to them.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And so when they get in that myopic view of my impact is so great, the first thing they will go to is title, right? My business, what I do is important. What the people, the customers I serve are important. No, we're not doing this, right? And then when it comes down to it, right, where you got to shit or get off the pot, they end up getting off the pot because they get told they are not bigger than the greater good. Now, I wish that happened all the time, but I've absolutely had instances in private sector because money rules. Yep. Right? Bottom line is always going to win. I've been told, yeah, Larry, we're not doing that. Like that business unit is making $700 million a year. We're not going to do that. Right. So we're going to accept that risk because we don't see that risk is great enough to impact a $700 million a year business.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first lessons I had at JP Morgan Chase after I stopped working with the U.S. military and started working in finance. I remember I very much had a governance kind of mindset, and hey, this is the right way of doing this, whatever kind of mindset, kind of going into the bank there. And I remember talking about some technical control, and I was running the SOC at the time. And I was explaining, well, this is really a bad practice, and this is why it's a bad practice, and this is how it's exploited, and this blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, John, well, this is the CISO talking to me about this. And I'm like, so John, how much would it cost us to fix this problem? And I would like, well, there's blah, 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 a few $1 million. Okay. A few $1 million. Okay. So how much is it going to cost me if the regulator comes and talks to me about this? What's that going to cost me? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And he's like, it's going to be $25,000. So do you think we should spend it the next year and a few $1 million working on this problem and possibly get like a $25,000 fine for not doing it? Or what do you think we should do now? And I was like, wow, that was new. Those were not choices with the military. It wasn't like I could just accept a fine and whatever. I mean, we had our ATOs and stuff that we did, and authority to operate so that we could put a system online and onto the network, and so it could participate on the gig, the global information grid, right? Global information grid, and so we had a lot of controls that needed to be in place. Did we accept risk? Yeah, we accepted risk, but it wasn't like it was very, very the process was very known, transparent, what we had to document, who was the authority that was able to accept it. It wasn't someone in my command or even in my region, right? It was someone back at NSA that was talking about whether or not we would accept these risks and not let that system onto the network. And, it was different. It was somewhat different than I think corporate America behaves, but it is a money thing, right? It does come down to, is the juice worth the squeeze?
That's it. That's my favorite saying right there.
Well, you recently co-founded Confide alongside Jason Senamore.
Yep.
Tell us a bit more about Confide's work.
Yeah. So, Confide is the culmination of Jason and myself realizing that the buying process is broken and the risk to CISOs is too great, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I say it that way very purposefully, right? So, we call ourselves an advisory services firm that also resells technology. Now, the reason we created this is it's a twofold problem. So, number one. When you look at the buying process that has historically sort of been done for cybersecurity executives, it is, hey, I've got a problem I need to solve, right? That technology is going to solve it. And then somebody comes in and says, hey, this is the best thing since sliced bread, right? And the only checking or anything that's been done is, what are my technology requirements? Oh, are they a tech fit? I'm in this cloud. I need these connections. Oh, it works. And then they have one use case, right? Like you go through one, oh, this is great. It solves that use case of this particular problem, mm-hmm. right? They typically don't go beyond that. And then we have the same age-old problem and then they go away until it's renewal time, right? There's no real partnership or relationship. So that's one thing. So that to me hurts the role of the CISO immensely because the CISOs and their teams don't have time to spend trying to shrink this ever more crowded market, right? How many companies right now today literally use the same 5 key buzzwords to say they're doing one thing, but they're all doing actually different things? It happens. You go to RSA, right? It's buzzword bingo. Right? Go to Black Hat. You go to any conference, it's a buzzword bingo. So for CISOs and their teams, how can they decipher the market and figure out what's real and what's Memorex? So that's number one. Number two, I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that the CISO role is the most at-risk C-level role in the entire tech ecosystem because it is the only one that is fighting with both the vendor market, right, to really get value. It's fighting internally with their peers, is fighting above them with the board and the executive leadership team, right, to get the visibility and the budgets that they need. And now they're starting to fight with the regulators, right? And so if you think about it, there's been no other C-level role that has been told that they should go out and get their own insurance. They should go out and get their own, right? What? So I need to buy my own D&O insurance, but the CIO doesn't? The CTO and the CPO who are building the software that we're selling, they don't. Wait, so it's on me. So I've got all of the responsibility and none of the authority. Yeah, no. Right? And I use this analogy, and this is the analogy that people seem to get. I say, okay, you have a child, you and your significant other had a child, right? So you have the child and the child starts playing with knives. You're like, hey, don't play with knives. Like, that's dangerous. Don't play with knives. And your significant other says, hey, it's fine. Let them play with knives. It's okay. Wait, what? But playing with knives is bad. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. They cut their finger off. Your significant other looks at you like, how'd you let this happen? Now you, who originally said you didn't want them playing with knives, have to take them to the hospital and deal with the recovery. Because guess what? When a breach happens, who's working recovery?
Yeah, I know this. I know this story.
Right.
No, I think it
makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it. So, I think one of the kind of going back to your conversation with the general, right? You tell them what you were doing, tell them why you were doing it. You gave them options, right? And then they decided to pull rank and, go above it, go above your head, or attempt to go above your head, right? And let you circumvent the security control that you were laying down, or what you were doing. And I think that the complicator for this is, on the CISO side, is that, like you were saying, it's like you're having conversation with vendors. You're trying to, I kind of think of it as, I'm going to make a custom house, and I'm going to go to Home Depot and I'm going to grab all the little things that I might need to build a house, my 2,600 square foot house with whatever. And I'm going to go figure this out on my own. With everyone talking about the same things in different ways and different languages. Because you go to AWS, they talk one language, GCP is another language, Azure is a different language, and how they all fit in this very complex ecosystem. So you're dealing with that. And then you're dealing with the two things. One is the rapid adoption of new technology that's happening in your environment that's allowed to go super fast because of the cloud, which wasn't the case in 2003 when I was doing work with the military. I mean, it was like we procured hardware, and it would take months and months and a year to get hardware in place. And racking and stacking was a different thing, and it took a lot of time. You had lots of time in the meanwhile to kind of get everything together for your deployments that you were going to make. And then you have the internal conflict, right? What should we do? What should we not do? And I see that. And then, the only person, this is why I was bringing it back to generals, that your job is to say no to power. As a CISO, your job is to say no to power. It's not, and I'm not saying say no and you're going to get your way. It's look, let me shine a light on the risks that are present here. This is what you're asking us to accept, business leader, right? And they pull rank and they say, hey, the CISO isn't letting me go do this. And they bring it up to it goes up to the CEO, goes up to the executive committee, and they're saying, we can't fulfill this requirement because security is blocking, right? And it's often the case, just like you said, it's like, here are 3 or 4 options that you can take that's going to allow us to kind of continue, but they don't want to hear about options. Or sometimes,
because it's going to slow them down. They feel
it's going to slow them down. And why are you telling me about it now?
I'm already this far along.
Yes,
I can't go back and do that thing. And I'm like, well, we should have been at the table from the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think that where it kind of comes around is that the CISO has to. You can't. It's really hard, and I'd love your opinion on this. I don't think it's easy for a CISO to be likable if he's going to do his job or her job.
I disagree.
You don't? Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I actually disagree, because here's the deal. For a CISO to be likable, for me personally, right? So every place I've been, people have liked me. They've disagreed with me. They've not said yes to things I wanted to do, but they liked me because I was personable. Many CISOs I find that are not likable in their role. It's not because they're trying to get the business to do things that the business doesn't want to do, right? Or to do hard things. It's because their approach is very heavy-handed, right? We've historically been known as the Office of No, right? That's the moniker that the CISO's office is. Oh, it's the Office of No, right? And we got that badge of honor, rightfully so, because that's how we used to operate. But when you go in and you give options, right? You're not necessarily the Office of No, but some people still look at it that way. But for me, an approach that I've had for I shouldn't say always have, but I've had for a long time is I get to know executives personally, right? So when I go in, both my peers and those above me and above my peers, I'm getting to know them personally. I want to know they're married, their children. I get to know them personally, and I also get to know how they're motivated and incentivized. Because what that does is now I have a way to tie the things that I'm doing to the things that are important to you. So yeah, I'm going to come in and I'm going to want to talk about something that you're going to do that is going to create risk that I think you should go in a different direction. But I'm going to start that with, hey, how are the kids? Right? Are they still playing soccer? Right? How my kids just started soccer? Are your teams? My kids just started AAU basketball. Right? I come in and I sort of be personal and then bring up business, right? And so because I create a personal relationship, right, with them, their approach and their response to me has always tended to be a little softer than just no, because I'm not coming in heavy handed. And then when they say, well, that's going to cost money or that's going to cost, I'm not barking back at them like, how could you not do this? Like, this is going to cost me more work and this is going to cause my team to, right? I'm recognizing it. But it's also why I've sort of divested from the CISO role, right? I advise a lot of CISOs now and give a lot of guidance and mentoring, but I think ultimately those of us who were in CISO roles and in cyber as leaders back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I think screwed everybody that's doing it now, right? Because I just think the role is actually misaligned.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I definitely feel like it is and I was agreeing with you with the risk to the CISO, right, is real, right? It's like you were saying, cut off a finger. You're the one that everyone looks at like, how could you let this happen? I mean, I've been in those conversations where they have looked at me and they've said, John, you didn't tell us that this was going on. I'm like, it's in every one of my weekly reports. I've talked about it in the security committee meeting that we have every quarter, and I've talked to you personally about this multiple times. It's like, you didn't scream loud enough, John. You didn't.
You didn't scream loud enough.
Right. What? And again, it's like, it's, this is from my experience in Japan, where no one screams. Right. And, but I think that at the same time, it's even though you gave advice, you told them that there was risk. Now the risk is an actual threat. It's actually happening. Now you're looked to respond to it and recover from it. And then, of course, you're going to come back with, these are the things that we've got to do. And it's not just you saying, these are the things that we got to do. You also have, your incident responders and those experts coming in, they're saying, these are the problems that you have. And then you have regulators, or if you're like dealing with like PCI or other kinds of industries, you have regulators that come in, they're starting to tell you this. And now, but you're still the voice internally to say that we've got to do all these things now. And again, I think it's a very challenging role politically, and yes, you can be likable, right? But even if you know them well and you feel like you have a good relationship with them, that doesn't prevent them from looking at you, side-eyed, say, how could you let this happen?
Oh yeah, no.
You come back with the regulatory things that you got to go do to correct it. And be that you're not going to be the shining light in the room. It's hard. That's a very hard position. And then of course, because you quote failed, right? You didn't have that relationship with the other executives, then your job starts feeling like it's on the line as well.
Yep.
Right. And so it's very hard. Right. And so I do think that the, going back to Confide and, what you do there, it's really important to kind of understand both your internal infrastructure, like what is it that you actually, assets that you have that you need to protect and how do you tier them? And then secondly, how best do those products that are in the marketplace, how well do they kind of fit both your budget and your ability to execute is a big part of what needs to be kind of diagnosed there as well for the assets that you need to protect.
There's a third part I add to that.
Okay.
It also needs to fit your strategy.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Because
Yep.
what's happened, what I've seen happen many, many times is CISOs aren't looking at their strategy aligned to the 18 to 24-month strategy of the technology, right? And
Right.
so they've got this use case that is great right now, but then the strategy of that company is pivoting one way, and their program and their business is pivoting another way. And this product, then grows, right, in capability and functionality. And now you've got all these other things that you don't need, don't want, that you're
Right.
potentially paying licensing for, right, as
Yep.
part of it, right?
Yep.
And so,
Business
so there,
strategy, technology strategy, cyber strategy.
right,
Right.
right,
You need to know where you're going in the next 3 years.
yeah.
It's it's hard to make a on the spot decision right now and it be right next year and the year after.
Right. And it is. And that's why you've got to have that vision. And that's why, what I say about Confide is we meet CISOs where they're at. Because for us, we don't care if you're mature, immature, big team, small team. We know you need help, right? And our goal is to converse with you on as frequent a basis as you're willing to ensure that you're getting the help you need, whether that's consulting help,
Mhm.
advisory help, right, or technology help. It's just meeting them where they're at, right, to try and just be what everybody has defined as a good partner, but we haven't really seen executed well yet.
Agreed. When you started Confide, what was it? What was that leap of faith moment like? What drove you into entrepreneurship after having such a successful corporate career?
The juice not being worth the squeeze from my perspective as a CISO. Like honestly, it was seeing more CISOs, right, hit this wall of not just what's next, but holy crap, like we're still not getting D&O insurance. Why is that not a standard part of every package for a CISO? We're still misaligned, right? You've got CISO roles where there are more CISO roles that exist today than ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And literally, you can pull 5 job descriptions where they are all vastly different and looking for vastly different things. And most of the time, what they're asking for is wrong and not what they actually need. And so, all of these things coupled together, I was like, whoa, like what in the world is going on? And honestly, the entrepreneur journey is largely because of the trust and faith I have in my wife. My wife's been an entrepreneur for years, a little over a decade. And so, in order to take the leap, I was like, I need to have a support system. And she was like, listen, like you can do it. And I've had many people for years tell me I would be great at this. And I was like, no, like because there's comfort in a W-2, checks coming all the time. And, you know how much you're getting paid and all that. Once you go into entrepreneurship, they say as an entrepreneur, you're either crazy or a glutton for punishment. Like it's one of the two, right?
Well, you're a CISO.
So,
You're obviously a glutton for punishment.
well, so that's part of it, right? So I've been a CISO for a long time, so obviously a glutton for punishment is part of it. So I was like, well, why not go on this journey, right? Why not do something that's actually going to help the community that honestly for me has helped me so much? Because so my faith leads me. I tell people this all the time. I was made on purpose for a purpose, and I truly believe that God made me to help other people. Right through all the journeys, I feel everybody has got a unique lens at how they look at the world based on when they came out of the womb to today. You've been shaped by all the things you've experienced. And I think everybody's got an opportunity, right, and almost a responsibility to use those learnings to share with other people because you never know what other people are going through. And so for me, I love to share. I love to help other people be better. And so to find a way that I can actually make money doing it on my own terms was really, really powerful for me. And it just aligned to this faith journey that I've been on the last, 8 or 9 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I wish you a lot of luck with that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the industry, how it's evolved, and some modern security challenges.
Yeah. So I'm going to say this. The industry is having more money pumped into it now than ever before. right? And it's because a combination of the threats are rapidly increasing, right? Because there's money to be made on that side. The regulations are rapidly increasing because there are drivers to try and ensure that companies are doing the right thing for consumers, right? And so those things coupled together are creating more complexity, right? And so the onset of the cloud and now the onset of AI, those two, what I'll call, super happenings or whatever you want to call it, these things coming together, the formation of the cloud, right, making access and capability and functionality lickety split, and now AI, right, and AI's growth and acceleration has happened way quicker than any of us thought it would. We didn't think agentic was going to be something for 3 to 5 years, and it literally happened almost overnight. And so these things coming together are now shaping the market to where security actually is going to look vastly different in 5 years because, excuse me, we've got to think of new org structures because we're going to have portions of our team that are technically agentic. And you're just going to have people governing agentic AI models, right, that are doing their own work, right? And so, like, we've got to start rethinking how security operates because the reality is the threat actors, and they've always been ahead of us. But now that nation states have pumped so much money into it, it's that much worse for us as practitioners. And so the industry is constantly evolving, but just at a far faster rate than anything I ever imagined. And I don't want to say I'm fearful for what it looks like in 10 years, but I can't even envision what it looks like in 10 years just because of something I just read about quantum, where someone actually created a quantum chip that operates at room temperature. Like, if that becomes an actual real thing that gets into development and we are going to really, really see a change in the fundamental way we operate and build out security programs. And I think the CISO role is going to become one that will be more like what it should have been, which is more of an advisor, because I think that we're going to get into such a world of automation with AI that a CTO is going to be ultimately the person running all aspects of technology, right? Security, everything. And that the CISO is going to be this governing body, right, that sits outside, that leads the governing forces around, hey, are these things being done properly? And using a different model to sort of govern these AI things. It's going to be, I just don't see it being this behemoth that we've grown into today in the cybersecurity space.
Well, I think that I agree. I think definitely the cloud changed how we operate IT in lots of different ways. I think the other big change is kind of on that same path has been the advent of SaaS apps and how all our applications are somewhat distributed. They're not in our own data centers, our own little private spaces anymore. They're just all over the place. And most of our security programs were built around, hey, how do you see what's going on in your network? And you were talking about firewalls and ACLs and blocking off Class Cs. We can't really do that anymore. We can, but it's not as effective because most of the transactions we have are HTTPS going to SaaS apps through a browser.
Well,
and these SaaS apps have just increased in speed. Definitely AI is that other piece, right? So I think that there's, cloud kind of beget SaaS, kind of beget like lack of visibility and control of where your data is and everything else, and spreads risk out all over the place. Now the application, I don't know if you remember, but I remember when I was younger, we used to deploy applications. I was a Tivoli Linux guy, Unix guy back in, many decades ago. And the whole thing was, how do I distribute apps to endpoints, right? How do I get apps to the workstation, these fat apps? And now we don't do this anymore. We just have web browsers that we connect to everything, whether they're on-premise or not on-premise or going to some other SaaS app, it doesn't really matter. We have this incredibly useful tool that has kind of provided this kind of gateway into our environment for our users to use, right? And then, then again, to your point, I think AI is going to accelerate a couple of things. I think I don't really feel threatened about AI, about someone using AI to create phishing attacks faster. I think we have the technology to defend against phishing attacks, from a
Because it's not the
technology
phishing.
perspective.
Because it's not the phishing. It's not that the email came through. No, it's the secondary component to it. Was there an attachment on it, or was there a link that they want you to click on? Right.
Yeah. And then it's like, and do we have the defenses to control outbound flows? We used to. Right now, we're having to get additional technologies. We were talking about web filtering earlier and how we could see what content was going, where people were going back in the military parts of our careers, right? Whereas that kind of, you don't really see proxy servers and content filtering systems.
The architecture doesn't work anymore.
The architecture doesn't work anymore.
Right. And so, but this is where ZTNA came in. So this entire aspect, right, of creating these now broad security networks where, okay, yes, you're on an endpoint at home, but your edge becomes this point in the cloud that you go to. And then we've got this cloud infrastructure that you go through and has all these technologies built into it. So we know who you are when you come into this cloud environment and you're going into our virtual sort of infrastructure to then go access the SaaS apps that technically sit outside the virtual infrastructure, but we can see it now because you had to come through us to go get. It's similar but different, right? And so
it is similar, but yeah, I think that's my point. There is exactly, now we have performance. We've created performance problems on the network because we're trying to tunnel everything to these cloud infrastructure that then they have to then send things back out so that they can control the flows, right? In this very much ZTNA kind of way. But like I said, I think that this is like creating performance issues, which creates shadow IT, shadow SaaS kind of problems. And, it's like, it's at some point in time, we got to get from my point of view, being a SquareX field CISO, is like, we got to get back to the browser. I mean, that's where our users are. How do we protect them there? Control where people are flowing because you have actual context and you have visibility in what's happening. We kind of lost that when we lost IDSs and IPSs and web content filtering and that kind of stuff. We pushed it out and it went away. And now it seems like most attacks that happen that are successful against the user environment is happening in the browser or traversing the browser today.
Because the browser is the world, right? Because you'll remember, you're old enough like me to remember when we had this push, no more agents. I don't want agents. Right? I
remember that.
Yep. Right? Like we were going so far left of agents because agents were slowing down machines, right? But now I've got 10 chips in my machine. Like what? So whoever thought back when we were going away from agents, we didn't think about having 10, chips in a machine, right? In a laptop machine. No, you had to build a huge power bank at home in order to have 10 processors, right? But now that's in a little MacBook, right? And so we've now moved back to the whole, let's put stuff on the endpoint because A, the endpoint can now handle it. B, now we're in this world of virtual where not only are you not going into the office, but you're now also connecting to apps that are outside of our office. So you're not hitting our office infrastructure for anything, right? Not even telephony. I know people who have phones at home, right, that are going into a switch in the cloud, right, that then connects them back into, so they're not hitting any part of their actual corporate infrastructure when they're at home. And so
I've heard of companies that don't even have their own Wi-Fi. They're just on public Wi-Fi or what amounts to public Wi-Fi just because they can, because that, again, that's not where we control anymore. We're not controlling that. That's not the place to control.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting where we're going, and I don't see there being any rolling back. And it's interesting you brought up employees buying the stuff. That was that was one of the downside that nobody saw coming of the whole shadow IT. Right? Nobody thought that people would just go take their corporate, P cards and say, oh, you know what? We need this application in marketing. Right? Here, go buy it. Oh, HR needs this application. Go buy that. Subscribe to that, $300 a month application for 5 users. Oh, we're going to subscribe to this, application over here for marketing because 2 people need access to this video thing. And right, it just
so true. Those, I think that's the SaaS marketing ploy, right? They start off with just a couple of people in that environment and then kind of try to grow it, that grassroots kind of growth strategy. And they make it easy. I mean, they make it easy for you to sign in with Google or sign in with Microsoft Live or sign in with whatever. Right.
Yep.
And, now you have a 30-day free trial, right?
Right.
Just like that. And those shadow SaaS systems produce a lot of risk as well, because I don't know. I know I didn't tell you this, but when I was at Dyson, I did an audit of our SaaS apps, and we had maybe 230 apps that were inside of our SaaS conditional access policies that we were controlling.
Yeah.
It turned out that I had another 600 apps that were just uncontrolled. Just, people that were signing up with their email addresses, not part of SSO or MFA, using weak passwords and everything else. And then they're having other people from the company connect there and to share documents. And now I have like this, data sprawl kind of problem that's occurring because people can just sign up, for free to try something else. And, just like on, Postman and those other places, they're happy to give you a free account. You just can't secure anything in it.
Right.
And so it's, it's a problem that I feel like that we don't really have enough visibility on, right? I mean, as a CISO, and because you don't see things, you see things that go through the normal procurement channels. You don't see the free signups. You don't see the expense reports on, that people are, turning in. We're not seeing everything that we probably need to see so that we can control how it is that our users are accessing all of these SaaS apps.
Yep.
Right? So,
and they're using their corporate emails in many of these, right?
Yes.
To go out to these sites. So now the corporate email is out there. And then when one of those sites gets popped, they're sometimes using the same password, right, that they use for their corporate email. Now this thing gets popped, this app you don't know about. Now you've got somebody that's got username and password to your corporate environment. Hopefully you've got MFA.
And you don't want people to do that, right?
No.
Please don't reuse your passwords, right? And if you had technology that you could stick in your browser so that doesn't happen,
right.
If you need that, come talk to us. We're happy to help you solve that problem so you don't have password reuse in your environment. You recently shared an article on how CISO should ditch the ego and that narcissistic tendencies have grown into the CISO role. Can you elaborate more on this trend and how it impacts the profession?
Yeah, so the role of CISO has been treated like a private club, right? And yes, it's hard. Yes, there's a lot of holding hands, singing "Kumbaya," but there's been some people who have used that to then start giving people the Heisman to make them feel less than. No, you can't come in here. No, you can't be a part of this. You can't, right? And that's not how it should be, because at the end of the day, we've got a responsibility as leaders to actually, groom and set up the next set of folks to be well positioned to be able to come in and do this role, right? We just have that responsibility. And back to what I said earlier, share with them our lessons learned, share with them our failures, be open and be transparent about the things that worked and the things that didn't work, so that they can then come in and not repeat the same mistakes that we did. Right. And even though technology is continuing to change and continue, some of the principles still stay true regardless. And so with that, that whole aspect of, puffing your chest out because you're the CISO of this company doesn't mean anything. Yes, you've got great responsibility. Yes, you are doing a very important job, but you are still someone who has a requirement and a responsibility from my standpoint just to be human and be able to share both the good, bad, and ugly associated with your role openly so that you can help the rest of the community. Because technically, we're all in this together, right? I don't know a single CISO in any company that isn't trying to figure out what their peers are doing so that they can be better at their job. But if you are giving people the Heisman because you're bigger than, you're in a bigger company, you've got more, then you're not doing the community a good service.
Yeah, and I think it's incumbent on us to also shape the younger people that are coming into the industry as well, because they have a different kind of sense of the industry, coming in with professional degrees and those kinds of programs that we didn't have when we were growing up, right? But and I'm glad that they have it. I'm glad that they have like degree programs for cyber. But often I feel like there's a gap in the technology understanding and the reasons why we do these things. And I think that's where we as leaders can help them identify gaps in their knowledge and help them find projects that they can kind of increase their technical skill sets. Because I have the feeling that a CISO needs to be technical because we need to understand the technology that's in place so that we can put up the appropriate defenses and not have to listen to, if you're illiterate, then you have to listen to your EYs and your Deloittes and your Accentures to tell you how to run a program, right? You don't want to be in that situation. That's where you need good partners to help you understand, because there's a lot to understand. There's lots of capabilities that are available to you, and there's lots of different ways that you could configure it. You need help. You probably need help. But you don't want to come at it like just completely illiterate to the technology scapes, right?
Agreed.
But so I do agree with that. But I think we do need to do more mentoring and more outreach, and especially the folks that are, kind of do it like not internships, but those programs like apprenticeships, right? Where you find people to mentor. And
it's interesting because I've had a lot of conversation over the last 3 years on whether we are a profession or it's a profession, or are we like labor or something? I can't remember the term. A good friend of mine, Kim Jones, he brought this topic up, right? And we don't do apprenticeships well. We do internships even worse, right? Because internships has basically been, what is it that no one wants to do? Okay, let's get an intern in here and we're just going to give that to them. And there's no growth plan. There's no learning plan. There's nothing really tied to help them learn the industry. Because as it relates to the collegiate programs around cyber, so many of them aren't teaching them what the cyber industry looks like. I've seen many, and I've hired them, graduating from college with no idea of what the roles are that exist in cyber, right? And so I think that as leaders, we've got a responsibility to be the voice and be the people that are going to help them understand what the real cyber world looks like, whether that's through mentoring, whether that's through internships, proper internships with a plan, or apprenticeships. We've got to be that voice that helps them understand, right, what it actually looks like in the real world. Just like when I was a programmer, right, in college. Classroom programming versus real world programming was vastly different. And I had no clue, right, until I got the internship and got in. I'm like, this sucks, right? Yeah. And so I think we have a responsibility sort of to do that for those coming into the field.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's classroom versus actually having the job to do the work are completely different. I mean, I see so many folks on programs where they get taught open source tools that they can do on their laptop and that kind of stuff, and none of those tools are what you have in an enterprise. They just don't scale, right? And it's like, we're not teaching the tools that you're going to have in front of you inside of corporate America, right?
Yeah. That's a problem because they can't afford to have those tools in the classroom. I like that if they are
Yeah, I
giving
hate
you
that too.
hands-on capability, that they're focusing on the principal mindset of what they're using, right? So getting command line skills is good,
You
right? But
should. Yeah.
understanding that the command line in this is going to be different than that. But if you are comfortable with one command line, your ability to pick up another. But it's the mindset of thinking through. Because when you get on the command line, the way you search and the way you're going to dig down is going to apply holistically across all command lines, right? The
Mhm.
mindset, your keystrokes and the commands specifically may be different, but the mindset plays the same. And so I love when there are ones where they're having them. But I've seen kids come out of college and not have done any of it, and they got a cybersecurity.
Right.
Like, what did you do? And it was
Well,
all book learning. It was all book. And I was like, oh my dear Lord, right? They didn't really do
they're
any.
uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable on the command line. That's a
Right,
really hard place to be in cyber. I mean,
right.
as a CISO, I mean, I like to spend time on the keyboard. I like to be on the command line. I just find it easier to get the information I want faster than
Yeah.
try to mouse around and do all that kind of stuff, right? So, but yeah, we got to do our part to help mentor, get get folks into good apprenticeship programs where they're going to learn those capabilities. But I think we also need to go back and say, hey, if these college programs aren't building the kind of talent that we want, we need to go find those programs that are building talent that we want and let them
100%.
know that we need this kind of talent. Because I think that's being lost. You know, I've had several folks that wanted to be a SOC analyst and then they wanted their weekends and stuff. And it's like, how you
Right.
signed up to be a fireman, you know, and fires happen when fires happen. They don't happen 9 to 5,
Oh,
right?
I've heard people say that. I'm like, oh, you're so cute. Yeah, that's not how
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah. Um, so 2 more questions, right? As a current board director, what advice do you have? What advice do you give to emerging security leaders who aspire to board positions?
Yeah. So I tell them all, and I have a few people that I've given this guidance to because the whole after CISO or what's next after CISO has been a huge topic of conversation. And the reality is I tell them, like, you need to educate yourself on what being a board member means, right? And then also educate yourself on what I call the pomp and circumstance of board membership, right? There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, right? Calling to order, a second, like there's a lot of things and nuances to being on the board that as someone who's presented to the board, you've never seen, right? You didn't participate in. And a lot of people think, oh, well, I've presented to boards, so I can be on a board. Not quite. That's not really how that works. You need to understand what being a board director means, what liability you're taking on there with that, like what your role is in helping to both govern and direct the company based on your specific thing that you're doing. And there are tons of courses out there now, right? You can get them through universities, you can get them through NACD, you can get them through director. I can't remember the name of the other one, but there's quite a few places that you can get it. But I would not go to these spun up apps that have and these little spun up SaaS companies that are saying, "Hey, we'll get you a board position." I will tell you directly. I know multiple dozens of people who say that does not work, and I am one of them. Right? Where you pay to go? No, it's not. It's not a thing. And I should say the experience I've had and the experience everybody I know who's tried it has been a zero. So it's not something I would recommend.
I'm going to
But
ignore that email that they sent me then.
yeah, I don't like to name companies, but what you should do is find rooms where other board directors are. Get into rooms where there are other members of the board of directors at companies, because it is 100% a networking thing. When a new board director role comes up, they go to their network. They go to people they know. They go to people they've met. They go to people that they've built some level of comfort and understanding with. And the number one thing that I hear every time is the people who get the job are the people who get recommended.
Absolutely. For someone just starting their cybersecurity career today, What would be your top 3 pieces of advice based on everything you've learned over 3 decades?
Somebody's starting their cyber role today. So the number one thing I tell everybody when it comes to cyber, you will burn out fast if you don't do one thing, and that is find your passion. You got to find what you're passionate about. And cyber is this wide, right? From deeply technical to not technical at all, right? And so you've got to find where in that line, right, where you're at, and what it is that you literally can do, right, for 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours, and your curiosity is going to continue to carry you, right? Because if you don't, whatever you end up going into, you are literally going to get burnt out, because you will find a time where you're going to have to do 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours, and it's going to feel like hell. And so find that one area that just intrigues you so much that you find and light a fire, right, of passion, because you want to dive into that and swim and swim and swim and swim.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think that that so many people that are coming out of college with cybersecurity degrees, they're doing it because it's a good job.
Right.
But man, it's a hard job if you don't like it.
Right.
You know, and I mean, I've been doing IT since '89, you know, so it's multiple decades, and doing cybersecurity since 2003. And I love cyber. I love technology, and I love the cyber parts of it. I mean, it just feeds me dopamine just constantly. Right. And, but I mean, I love it. But I think that for folks that are coming in and they're just, they're just dying on the vine here because they got the cybersecurity degree and stuff. Like you said, okay, whatever this position is that you have that's not filling your cup here, there's lots of other things to do. Go find that's in cyber that you enjoy and is going, you're going to wake up excited the next day. I mean, it's not like it's like that every single day. I mean, there have been many days that I didn't want to go into the office. I didn't want to handle whatever it was that was, in front of me that day.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of it is just resilience. This is a career path for people that, need, if you don't have resilience, learn resilience. Right?
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. The unfortunate thing is that because cybersecurity from a pay scale standpoint outpaced IT, people are like, oh, I want to go into cyber. And they were doing it for money-based reasons.
That's right.
And 90% of the people that I know that did that, like, switched out because they're like, yeah, I can't, like, this is not sustainable. I'm like, yes. I'm like, because you did it, right, for the wrong reason.
Right.
Like, and if you think about life, the majority of things that you get in for the wrong reason end up failing, right? So for your career, it's important to ensure that you understand what this industry is, where this industry is going, and if you want to be there for that ride because you just love it that much. Because if you don't, right, you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of frustration trying to figure out something else now that you've already gone so far down a path.
Larry, it was great having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me.